All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning. Sure to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tammuz, Naftali Tilson of Talmud Israel, Meretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shirman Drashos this month in commemoration of the yard site of his parents, Rabbi Yonah ben Avraham Leib and Rivka Bas Yaakov. We are also in the Meretz Hashem of the entire Daf Yomi Chavra. Meretz Hashem means Zocha to finish Shas B'Shah Tohu U'Mitzlachos. We hope that the neshamas have an aliyah, the family in nechama, and indeed we are all zocha Meretz Hashem to continue to swim through the Yam Shal Talmud together. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Tova Nes Aver, in the schus of the entire shir, and Meretz Hashem continuing to grow and to learn together for many years to come. But so with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Mem Hey 45. We are picking up on Mem. I have a lot to do today. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Mem Dalar Mudbeis 44b, and we are picking up 21 lines up from the bottom. So Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the following shaila: Ben Bavel Shenosa Isha Be'eretz Yisrael Ve'echnisa la'avodim u'shvachos. So a very interesting case. What happens if a man from Bavel, call him Ruvain. Ruvain's from Bavel. Ruvain marries a woman from Eretz Yisrael. And what happens? As part of the property that she brings into the marriage, she brings in avodim, an Eved Kanani. So I'll say, what's the halacha? V'daito lachzar. Now his intention is after they get married, in Meretz Hashem, he's going to resettle in Bavel. So I'll say, Mau. What's the shaila? Supposed to hear what's going on over here? So now remember again, when a woman brings property into a marriage, so she retains the title over the property, but husband gets usage, gets peros. So the shaila is now Rachel from Eretz Yisrael married Ruvain from Bavel, and their intention is to go live in Bavel. So the shaila just is, does this now become a case where Rachel has effectively sold her Eved Kanani to Chutz La'aretz? And as we saw in yesterday's daf, what's the halacha when you sell your Eved Kanani to Chutz La'aretz? What's the halacha? Yatzel L'cheirus. So that's the shaila. Great question, right? Great question. So Tibay L'man Damar Adinima, Tibay L'man Da'amar Adinimo. So we'll say, so now this is a shaila. Rashi calls the Gemara Maseches Yavamas. So we'll say we actually spoke about this when we did Yavamas. It's a very interesting case. When a woman brings in property, I will say, remember again, there are two different types of property. There's what's called Nichsei Tzon Barzal, Nichsei Malog. Focusing for a moment on Nichsei Tzon Barzal. Nichsei Tzon Barzal means it's property that the woman brings into the marriage. At the time of the marriage, there is a valuation, and the husband guarantees that value upon death or divorce. So even if something happens to the property is used up, property is destroyed, husband has committed upon death or divorce to paying the value of that property. So here's the shaila. Let's say Reuven and Rachel get divorced. They get divorced. Now what happens? The property is extant. It's there. So Rachel says, give me back my property. Husband says, no, I'm not giving back the property. I'll give you the value. I want to keep the property, but I'll give you full top dollar. So I will say there's a machlokis in halacha as to who is correct in that situation. So the Gemara says, this is a shaila, according to the opinion who says, hadin imo, that the halacha sides with him meaning that he could keep the property and pay the value. And this is a shaila, even according to the opinion who says hadin ima, that she could demand the property back. The shaila of both. So watch this. So the Gemara says, so kevan da hadin ima, so on one hand we could say, if the halacha follows her, or is the meaning of what I would say, the halacha follows her, namely, that she has the right to demand back her property. So kidida damu, therefore, the slave is considered to be like hers, right? And therefore, halacha l'maisa, because we're both say, since she retains full title upon death or divorce, she gets that slave back. Therefore, what? It's not considered as if she sold the slave to Chutz La'aretz because she retains ownership over it. Odama, given the meshadli the peira, kidideinamo. On the other hand, maybe since halacha l'maisa, the husband gets full usage of it, he's considered to be the owner. V'tibay l'man da'amar hadinimo. The question is, according to the opinion who says that the halacha follows him, namely, that upon death or divorce, he could say, I'm keeping the property, but I'll pay you top dollar. Kivan da hadin imo kididei damu. Since we say that halacha l'maisa he can keep the property, maybe the eved is considered to be like his, right? And therefore halacha l'maisa is considered as if it was sold to Chutz La'aretz. Oh, dilma, kivan del kanei legufei kididei damu. On the other hand, he doesn't really own title to it, right? The guf belongs to the woman, to which the Gemara says, teku. You know what, you're right. Not sure what to do with this one. So it's just a fascinating case. So again, Rachel from Eretz Yisrael marrying Reuven from Bavel, she's bringing in an Eved Kanani into the marriage. So is this considered to be halacha l'maisa, like a case of selling your Eved to Chutz La'aretz? It's really dependent, fascinatingly enough, on another machlokes, which is how do you view, or who has ultimate rights in Nichsei Tzon Barzla upon death or divorce? Does he have the right to hold on to the asset, pay the money, or could she say, I demand the asset back? Because that's a machlokes, and that influences ultimately, again, how we view their respective relationships to the Eved. Therefore, the Gemara ends off with the Teiku. Fascinating, fascinating. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, it happens to be that the Rambam says over here something very interesting. The Rambam says, quotes this case. He says, Ben Bavel Shanasi Isha Beretz Yisrael V'dait Olach Shavech Nisalo Ishto Avadim Ushvachos Hari Elu Safek Im Heim Kamisha Machra Osum L'Chutz La'aretz Hovi Yishlo Peros. So I will say, actually the Rambam codifies this halacha, and the Rambam says it's a Safek. It's a safek. By the way, that's how he leaves it. That's how he leaves it. Okay. Anyway, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, I'm Rabbi Avo. Shalom Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan taught me the following halacha. Eved, shiyatza achar Rabbi Lusra. So we'll say this is an interesting case, right? You have Reuven. Reuven owns an Eved Kinani. Fine, right? Reuven lives in Eretz Yisrael. He's zochet live in Eretz Yisrael with his Eved Kinani. So we'll say, so what happens? Now, Reuven goes out to Surya. Now, I'll say, remember again, we've spoken about Surya a number of times. What is Surya? Surya was the area conquered by David HaMelech, right? So, but it was Kibush Yachid. It wasn't the Milchemes Mitzvah. It was a Kibush Yachid, an individual conquest of David HaMelech. So, I'll say, in general, there's a discussion when it comes to Surya. Is it like Eretz Yisrael? Not like Eretz Yisrael? That is a fundamental machlokes. For Avadim purposes, it's Chutz La'aretz. Okay, so now watch this. So Reuven, the master, goes out to Surya. Now we'll say what happens. Eved shetz acharav Surya. The Eved follows. Now we'll say, to be clear, right? The master did not bring him. The Eved followed on his own. You know what happens if you don't close the door after those avadim, right? They just get out, right? So the Eved follows. The Eved followed the master on his own. So we'll say, so what happened? Umachro sham. And then the master sold the Eved in Surya. So the Gemara says, Umachar Sham Rabo, Yatzel Lecherus. Ultimately, the slave goes free. Okay, so we'll say, Vahatani Rabbi Chia, Ibe Ezechuso. But 1 second. But Rabbi Chia said, no, this case is different. Why is this case different? Because the slave came out on his own. I was supposed to say, this is not just, remember again, what's the typical case? The typical case is the master is the one actively removing the slave from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz. That's the Mishnah says the Knas, your Eved goes free. This case is different. The Eved is coming of his own volition. So Rabbi Chia says, if the Eved comes of his own volition, even though, yes, the master ultimately sells him, because the slave left of his own volition, he lost the right, so to speak, to go free, the emancipatory right to go free, or the emancipatory right upon being sold. So the Gemara says, Shabbos says it's a contradiction. So we just said before that if the master sells the Eved in Surya, ultimately the Eved goes free. Rabbi Chia says he doesn't go free. Lo kashya, kan shedas Rabbi Lachsor, kan she'in das Rabbi Lachsor. Very interesting. I will say first white line on the bottom. What does it depend on? It depends on whether or not the intention was for the master to go back to Eretz Yisrael afterwards. If the intent for the master to go back to Eretz Yisrael, then ultimately, again, the Eved doesn't go free. If the intent for the master wasn't to go back to Eretz Yisrael, then the Eved does go free, to which the Gemara says, V'atanya, but we learned Yotzia Eved Achar Rabba L'Surya. We'll say, but we learned, is actually interesting, the Brisa seems to say, that an Eved could follow his master out to Surya. Second white line, I will say, Yotze, lo sagi de lo nofik. So what's that? He can go out. Is he obligated to follow? Vatnan, we learned, ve'in hakomotzian, We'll say, we learned that in general, that Allah Lamaisa, you cannot force family members or household members to leave Eretz Yisrael. You can't do that. So what's going on over here? So what's rather what it means is like this. If the master, right, Reuven, departed from Eretz Yisrael to Surya, and the Eved followed of his own volition, Umachro Rabo Sham, and ultimately again the master then ended up selling the servant in Surya, Imdas Rabo Lachzar, If it is the intention of the master to go ahead and go back to Eretz Yisrael, Kofin Oso, we force him. Now, both say, who's the him in this case? The him is the purchaser. We force the purchaser to emancipate the Eved. We force so that the Eved could go back with the master to Eretz Yisrael. V'im das Rabba Lachzar. But if the master's intention is not to go back to Eretz Yisrael, ein Kofin Oso, we do not force the purchaser to emancipate the Eved. So I will say, do you hear how interesting this is? So this is a different kind of case. So let's just review what's happening over here. Ruvain, master, lives in Eretz Yisrael. He goes out to Syria. What's the status of Syria? Status of Syria? So the real answer, what is the status of Syria? Machlokes. For Eved purposes, status of Syria? Chutz la'aretz. So it says, now what happens? Eved follows master of his own volition, right? Master's not bringing him. He follows him to Syria. So again, master says, now once so what does master do? Master sells servant in Syria. So what's the halacha? So now the Gemara says it depends. What does it depend on? Is the master going back to Eretz Yisrael? If the master is going back to Eretz Yisrael, we force the purchaser, we'll call him Shimon. We force the purchaser to emancipate the Eved. We force the purchaser to emancipate the Eved. If the master is not going back to Eretz Yisrael, we do not force the second master, Shimon, to emancipate the Eved. We'll say, why do we force the master to emancipate the Eved? That seems to be a penalty on the Eved, ultimately because he came out to Chutz La'aretz of his own volition. Fascinating. So Rabbanan said, Shamas mina demar Shmuel tarti. The truth is, we learn from Shmuel two halachas. Chadahach, so we'll say one is halacha that we just mentioned about the Eved following the master to Syria. The idach, the other one, we'll say, listen to this. The itmar, hamocher sadeh b'shnas hayovel atzma. We'll say, this is very interesting. What is the halacha if one sells their land during the Yovel year itself? And I will say, remember again, what happens with property during Yovel? What happens with property? Everything goes back to its original owners. So what happens if one actually sells real estate, on Yovel? So the Gemara says, Rav Amar Mechura v'yotza. Rav says, it works. In other words, the transaction works, and then right after you sell it, what happens? It returns to you, the owner. Ushmuel Amar Shmuel says, Eina Mechura kol ikar. Shmuel says, no, there's no sale. In other words, there are no real estate sales during the Shemitah year because Shemitah is the reset. Yovel, thank you. Yovel is the reset. Therefore, any real estate transaction you engage in, by definition, I'll use the word, it's voided. It just never happens. So the Gemara says. So if you take a look at Rashi, v'yotza lebailim miyad v'zeh hefsid ma'osav. So there's a very important detail over here. There's a very important detail that according to Rav, that the sale works. Rav will say, what happens right after the sale works? What happens right after the sale works? Ultimately, again, the property goes back to its original owners. Rav will say, what doesn't go back? The purchase price. So interestingly enough, according to Rav, what would happen is like this. If on a Yovel year, Reuven sells his field to Shimon, so again, the purchase works, right? The purchase works, so Shimon paid the money to Reuven. Now again, Yovel kicks in, returns the field back to Reuven, but Reuven need not return any money. On the other hand, Shmuel holds, Eina Mechura Kolik, or look at Rashi, he's a Mekabel Chomer. Uma Mechura Kvar Yotze Achshav She'eina Mechura Eino Din Shalom Timkar. They come up, so I'll say, fine. Shmuel says, there's no sale. Now watch this, the Gemara says, Bechada hadri zvini, ubechada lo hadri zvini. So I will say, so now listen to this. So now Ravanan said, I know that in one of these cases, according to Shmuel, the money goes back, and in one of these cases, ultimately the money is not returned. But lo yedana heminayu. But I don't remember which case. So I will say, so therefore, what we have over here is Shmuel in two cases. Case number one was by the Eved Kinani. Remember again, master goes out to Syria, Eved follows, master sells Eved in Syria. So what's talacha? If master is going back, we force the purchaser to go ahead and emancipate the Eved. Master's not going back, we don't force the master to do that. Now both say, now what's the shayla in that case? The shayla in that case is, what happens to the money? Let's say the master is going back. So now we're going to force purchaser, Shimon, to emancipate the Eved. What happens to the money, right? Shimon paid for that Eved. What happens to that money that was paid? That's one. Case number two, Shmuel said, if you sell a field during Yovel, ultimately, again, the sale does not work. Okay? What happens to the money? So Ravanan said, in one case, Shmuel said, the money goes back to its original owner. The second case, the money doesn't go back. Ravanan says, only a little small problem. I don't remember which case is which. Which case is which? To which the Gemara says, Amr Yosef, let's analyze this. We learned in the Braisa that if one sells his Eved to Chutz La'aretz, the Eved goes free. V'tzarech get shichrur me'rabo sheni, and he requires a get shichrur document of emancipation from the second master. Now, both say the fact that you need a get shichrur from the second master, what does that tell you? Shma mina Kanye Rabo, Kanye Rabo Sheni. We'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha lemaisa, the second master does in fact acquire the Eved for lo hadar zvini, but the purchase price need not be returned. V'chiyam Shmuel Hasam, Shmuel said by the Yovel case, Eina Mechura Umaos Chosrin. Shmuel said, I will say that in the Yovel case, the transaction is void and the money goes back. So I will say, the Gemara suggesting over here is as follows. In the Eved Kanani case, even upon emancipation, ultimately, again, the purchaser lost out on his money. He's going to have to emancipate the Eved, but he does not get his money back. In the Yovel case, the Gemara is suggesting, when you sell a field during Yovel, the transaction itself is void. There's no transaction. So you see the difference? Sometimes in halacha, you can have like this. You can have a situation where the transaction is valid, but you're penalized for having engaged in it. So what will we do? Will make you reverse the transaction afterwards. But the transaction, that's the case. When you sell an Eved to Chutz La'aretz, does it work to sell an Eved from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz? Does it work? Does it work? Absolutely. Just once you did it, we throw the book at you, and you now have to emancipate that Eved. But the transaction worked. Because the transaction worked, you lost your money. You did something you shouldn't have done. You lost your money. You have to free the Eved, and you, purchaser, lost your money. In the Yovel case, I will say the Gemara is suggesting the transaction doesn't work. The transaction doesn't work. If Yovel goes ahead and resets property ownership to try to sell property, simply doesn't work. And if you did it, again, the transaction is void. If the transaction is void, then what? You get your money back. You get your money back. Incredible. What's the top of Memei? For Rabbanan, Brisa lo Shmuel. Rabbanan never heard this Brisa. He never heard this Brisa. That's why he was unclear which case was which. V'imi the Shmuel, mimai deina mechura umaos chosrin. So I'll say ultimately again, I don't understand the case of Shmuel. How do you know that eina mechura? How do you know that in the case of Yovel, eina mechura means the transaction is void and the money goes back to the purchaser? Maybe Dilma eina mechura umaos matana. Oh, maybe I will say eina mechura means if you try to sell a field during Yovel, the transaction doesn't work, right? And if you do so, ultimately again the money becomes a matana. This Gemara gives a good example of this. Midi dahava amakadesh es achoso. Well, say interesting case. What happens if a man is makadesh his sister? He gives his sister kesef kiddushin hari'at nekudesh as li. $1 million zu, right? He gives $1 million. This is your kesef kiddushin. So I said the itmar. The Gemara says hamakadesh es achoso. What happens if one is makadesh his sister? Rav Amar Ma'os Chosrin. Rav says the money goes back. Ushmuel Amar Ma'os Matana. Shmuel says ultimately again the money is a matana. Rabbi say so. The Gemara says I don't understand how you know that when Shmuel says that the transaction by Yovel doesn't work, that means that the money returns. Maybe the money goes as a gift. Maybe the money goes as a gift. The Gemara is right. And I will say, now the truth is, the Rishonim bring down the cases are really dissimilar. So I will say, you can make the cogent argument that one doesn't know the halachos of Yovel. And therefore, one maybe thinks that even though land returns, maybe they thought that they could go ahead and sell property, right? And that's why you could say, again, the transaction is void. In the case of a sister, I will say, everyone knows you can't marry your sister. So I will say, because everyone knows you can't marry your sister, bepashtos, when Reuven gives Rachel, his sister, the money, the only way to explain it is what is he doing? He's effecting a matana. Okay, because therefore I will say, it turns out that we have two different cases. In the case of Yovel, Shmuel says that Allah, if you try to sell property during the Yovel year, the transaction is void, money is returned back to the purchaser. In the case of Eved Kanani, if you sell an Eved Kanani to Chutz La'aretz, ultimately will force the second master to emancipate the Eved, and it appears that the purchaser loses his money. So we'll say fascinating. So not only does master number two purchaser have to go ahead and emancipate the Eved, he lost his money. To which the Gemara says, I don't understand. Amalei Abai the Rav Yosef. So Yosef, first wide line, Mem Hamad Aleph. Great Gemara. My chazis te kansina lelokeach, niknese lemochar. Now let's say, so this seems to be unfair, right? Let's play this out. Based on what we've just learned about, let's play this out. Ruvain lives in Eretz Yisrael. He owns an Eved Kenani. Ruvain now sells his Eved Kenani to Shimon in Chutz La'aretz. Okay? What's the halacha? Right? We tell Shimon, what do we tell him? Emancipate the Eved. And now that Rabbi say, who gets to keep the money? Ruvain. It's very interesting. So why are we penalizing the purchaser? In other words, Rabbi say, isn't the real prohibition on Ruvain? In other words, if you think about it, Ruvain comes out of this just fine, right? Because he sold his Eved, he got money, he gets to keep the money. Meanwhile, Shimon, who purchased the Eved, has to emancipate the Eved and also doesn't get his money back. So asks the Gemara, why are we penalizing the purchaser? Why not penalize the seller? Rabbi says a great line, Amarlei. So Rabbi Yosef says to Abaye, Lav achbera ganav elachora ganav. It's not the mouse who's the thief, but rather it's the hole who's the thief. Meaning what Rabbi say? So when a mouse steals something, mouse steals food, right, or something. So again, the mouse only steals if he has somewhere to place the stolen item. So in essence, in other words, Rabbi say, an illegal transaction could only occur if there is a purchaser. Right? If there's no purchaser, then ultimately the seller is not going to do anything illegal. So essentially the Gemara is saying it's the purchaser who enables the illegal transaction to occur. Therefore, the penalty rests on him. Amarle said back, come on. And if there's no mouse, then a hole doesn't pose any type of danger. To which the Gemara says, you're right, mistabra, heicha di'ika isura hasam kansinan. The Gemara says, I will say, the truth is, the penalty is levied upon the party who is in possession of the Isser. In other words, I will say, what we look at over here is right now, who has that Eved Kenani? Who has him? So the penalty ultimately again is going to go on whoever is in possession of, so to speak, the contraband item. What's the contraband item over here? An Eved Kenani who is sold to Chutzlar. So because it's the purchaser, therefore ultimately again the penalty is visited upon him. So Rabbi say this is fascinating. So therefore, when you sell your Eved to Chutzlar, it is the purchaser really who gets slammed with the penalty. He's going to have to emancipate the Eved, and he doesn't get his money back either. Pretty incredible. Let's go weiter. We'll say some good stories over here. We'll say there was an Eved who ran away. Now this is the opposite case. The Eved Kenani runs away from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael. Okay, Azal Mareya Basrei. So his master came looking for him. Rabbi Ami. The master came before Rabbi Ami. He wanted his slave back. Amarle, nichtov l'chashtara adame, because of legita decherusa. Rabbi Ami says to the master, here's the deal. We're going to write you a document for his value. In other words, what we're going to do is like this. Let me reverse it. Right? We're going to write for you a document on that. In other words, the Eved is going to owe you his value, and you are going to write the Eved a shtar shechrer. You're going to write, Rabbi Ami was commanding the Adon to emancipate his Eved, but the Adon should not have to bear a loss. Therefore, again, the newly emancipated Eved, I will say, remember again, what does a newly emancipated Eved become? What does he become? He becomes a full-fledged Jew. Now this full-fledged Jew is going to owe you his value. So therefore, again, you won't lose money. You'll still be owed the value of the Eved, but you must emancipate the Eved. V'ilo, and if you don't do this, I'm just going to extract the Eved from you and force you to write the document of emancipation anyway. So you have a choice. Either write the document willingly and get the value of the Eved, or we'll force you to emancipate. So we'll say, what is this based on? Rabbi Achi Rabbi Yoshia. This is Rabbi Yoshia. What does Rabbi Yoshia say? This año, lo yeshu ba'artzecha, penyachtiu oschali. So we'll say, this is talking about, again, the Zayin Umos. When a Klal Yisrael comes into Eretz Yisrael, the Torah says, do not allow the indigenous nations to dwell there, lest they cause you to sin ultimately again through their idolatry. So you might have thought this is talking about an idolater who has sworn off idolatry. Right? What if you have, so we'll say, which we call, what do we call an idolater who has sworn off idolatry? we call that a ger toshav, right? You might have thought that this even includes a ger toshav, that he can't live in your land. Talmud lomar lo saskir eved el adonav asher natzal elecha me'im adonav. So let's listen to this. Yet the pasuk says that if an eved runs to you, right? I will say this, and if an eved runs away from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, don't return him to his master. Allow him to reside with you. Allow him to reside with you. Then I will say, now here's what's interesting. In other words, why not? Because the assumption is that anyone who lives in Chutz La'aretz is as if they're worshipping idolatry, a very, very strong Gemara that we've seen before. So therefore, again, allow the Eved to reside with you in Eretz Yisrael. Okay? So my takanaso, imcha yeshe b'kirbecha. Ultimately, again, allow him to reside with you. So v'kashe Rabbi Yoshia, Hi me'im adonav me'im aviv mi ba'ilei. So we'll say, according to Rabbi Yoshia, the pasuk shouldn't say me'im adonav, it should say me'im aviv, because according to Rabbi Yoshia, it's really ultimately a reference not just to master, but to his idolatry as well. Ela am Rabbi Yoshia, b'mocher avda l'chutza la'aretz hakasav medaber. Pasuk is actually talking about one who sells his eved to chutz la'aretz. V'kashe Rabbi Acher Rabbi Yoshia, Hi asher natzal elecha asher natzal me'imach mi ba'ilei. It shouldn't say that he seeks refuge with you, but rather he seeks refuge from amongst you, it should say. Ella amar Rabbi Yoshia, be'eved shebarach michutz la'aretz li'eretz hakasav medaber. So we'll say again, rather the Gemara reinterprets the pasuk. Pasuk is talking about an eved who runs away from chutz la'aretz to Eretz Yisrael. So I will say, that's the point over here. The pasuk is saying over here that when an eved runs away from chutz la'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, do not return him to his master. Allow him to reside with you. So therefore, again, when this Eved ran away and the master shows up in Beis Din wanting to take the Eved back, Rabbi Yoshia says, here's the deal. You're writing a get shecher. If you do it willingly, we'll give you a document of indebtedness, an IOU that the Eved himself owes you for his value. If not, we're just going to emancipate him anyway based on this pasuk. Incredible. Tanya Yidach another brayso. Lo saskir Eved el adonov. So we'll say the pasuk says, do not go ahead and return an eved to his master. Rabbi Omer Belokech Avdu Amanas L'Shachra Kasim Medaber. Rabbi says it's talking about one who purchases an eved, ultimately on the condition to emancipate him. Hechidami, what's the case? Amar Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak the Kasav Lehachi. He writes the following: once I purchase you, you are emancipated as of now. Rav Chisda, so what's a different interpretation of the pasuk? Rav Chisda arekle Abdul Beikusai. So let's listen to this. Rav Chisda had a servant, like Eved Kanani, and his Eved Kanani ran away to Beikusai. Now we'll say whether or not Beikusai is actually like the name of a place or descriptive, meaning to a house where Kusim lived. Okay, point is Eved ran away. Shalach Lahu, so Rav Chisda sent a message to the place where the Eved was hiding. Hadrun Hilish, send it back to me, send my Eved back. Shochulei lo saskir eved al adonav. Pasuk says, don't return a master, don't return a slave to his master. Shalach lahu v'chein sasa lechamor v'chein sasa lesimloso v'chein sasa lechol aveidas achicha. So ultimately, again, Rav Chisda says there's a mitzvah of hashavas aveidah. When your friend loses an object, return lost object. I lost my eved, return it to me. So I v'haksiv lo saskir eved al adonav. Ultimately, again, they sent back to him, don't return a slave. Shalach lahu hahu be'eved shebarach michutz la'aretz la'aretz. So ultimately, we'll say that's talking about, so Rav Chisda sent back to them, that's talking about a slave that ran away from Eretz Chutz la'aretz to Eretz Yisrael. I'm in Eretz Yisrael, my slave's in Eretz Yisrael. Uchidra achi Rabbi Yoshia. Umay shna d'shach lu Rabbi Yoshia. Mishum d'mashu l'krai. We'll say, why did Rav Chisda say the pasuk like Rabbi Yoshia? Because that drasha seems to be a bit more implicit than the psukim themselves. Therefore, I will say, point over here is Rav Chisda was saying, don't use that pasuk on me. That's only talking about a case where the Eved runs away from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael. We're talking over an Eretz Yisrael case. Next, Abai Irkas Lechamra. I will say, great case. Abai lost a donkey, Beikosai. Once again, I will say, in the place of the kusim, shalach lahu. So they sent, shalach lahu, shadruali. So Rabbi said, listen, send me back my donkey got lost by you. So the Gemara says, shalchulei, shalach simna. So he said to Rabbi, no problem, I'm sending you the donkey, give us a siman. Okay, shalach lahu, dechivra krisei. So Rabbi sent back to them, the belly of the donkey is white. Send it back to me. Shalach lahu, ilav denachmani ad lo haba meshadran alech nehile. So I'll say, so listen to this. They said back to him, were you not Nachmani? But remember again, Abaye is known as Nachmani because ultimately, again, he was raised ultimately again in the home of Rabbi Nachman. So the Gemara says, were it not that you were Nachmani, lo have mashadle nehilach, atu kulei chamar lav kreisei chivrin ninu. We'll say all everyone knows, all donkeys have white stomachs. So therefore, again, that's not really a siman. Were it not for the fact that you are Abaye, right, and a great Talmid Chacham, and therefore we believe you. Therefore we would not go ahead and simply rely on this siman. Okay, we'll say a lot to say on this story in terms of if they were going to send it back to him without a siman anyway, why did they ask for the siman to begin with? Okay, so there's one more to speak about on that, but let's go weiter. We'll say now we come to a dramatically amazing Mishnah. We'll say we do not redeem captives for more than their value. Jewish captives, you do not redeem captives more than their value for the benefit of society. And I will say we do not help captives escape, ultimately, again, because of the benefit of society. Not out of a benefit to society, but out of a benefit to captives. So I will say this is a very dramatic Gemara. So we'll say, what does this mean? So we'll say this was just lest you think that this is not like a significant shaila. We'll talk about it in just a moment. But the Gemara says, what does it mean tikkun olam? So we have a Jewish captive. We have a Jewish captive, right? The value of a Jewish life is immeasurable. So now we'll say the Gemara says there's a cap. There's a cap on how much you should spend to redeem a Jewish captive. Why? Mipnei tikkun olam, for the benefit of society. What does it mean, the benefit of society? So the Gemara says, Mishum duchka de tziburuhu. We'll say, is it because we are concerned with impoverishing the community? In other words, we'll say, there's a finite amount of resources in the Jewish community, and therefore, again, you have to put a cap on how much you redeem Jewish captives for, because of duchka de tzibur. Rashi says, Ein lanu litchok atzibur, ulaviu lidei anios. You can't impoverish the community, ultimately, again, because of a captive. Oh, Dilma, Mishum Dolagarvu Valai Sutur. Maybe not. Maybe I will say it's because we don't want to incentivize kidnappings. In other words, if people know the Jewish community will pay any price for kidnapped Jews, then ultimately, again, you'll incentivize kidnappings. So we'll say, by the way, what's the nafkamina? The nafkamina will be if you have someone who is independently wealthy, right? Let's say again, Reuven's relative is taken captive. Reuven is independently wealthy. Reuven has more money than he knows what to do with. So now his relative is taken captive. They are demanding an exorbitant amount of money. If it's about impoverishing the tzibor, Reuven is like, I'm doing this myself. I'm not asking anyone for any help. If it's about incentivizing kidnappings, then what? It's still a problem. So also listen to this. Tashma the Levi bar darga parka labarte betleser alfe dinarizov. Levi bar darga redeemed his daughter for 13,000 gold pieces. We'll say an exorbitant amount of money. So we'll say it seems to be from there, you see from here, that if you are independently wealthy, you have the ability to go ahead and redeem a captive even for more than their value. I will say, however, we're establishing value. So it sounds like the issue over here is impoverishing the community. So we'll listen to this. Amar Abaye, Uman le'malam devratzon chachamim avad, dilma shalom ratzacham. We'll say, who says Levi bar darga did the right thing? Right? Who says he asked the shaila? Maybe he just did what he had to do, even though, again, I will say it was not the right thing to do. So I will say this is an incredible Gemara. So therefore I will say you see over here that the Gemara itself does not go ahead and seem to indicate which one. The Rambam paskins that really it's an issue ultimately of incentivizing kidnappings. That's what I will say. Just so you should know, this was a raging dispute in Eretz Yisrael not so long ago with the Gilad Shalit prisoner swap. And there were many who were opposed to ultimately, again, the price that was exacted from Israel when go ahead and freeing Shalit, because at the end of the day, again, they released terrorists, a number of whom went on to commit acts of terror afterwards. They were also negotiating, again, for the bodies of the 3 Israelis who were killed. This was the other piece also, that if you're negotiating not even for live Jews, but you're even willing to pay a high price for dead Jews. So again, it's one thing if you incentivize captors keeping people alive, but now if terrorists know that they could demand whatever they want, even just for the loot. So again, I'm just pointing out what I was saying, but you see what a sensitive issue this is. On the other hand, the ability to go ahead and save one Jewish life, saving one life is like sustaining an entire world. So I will say, why does the Gemara bring down this case of Levi bar Parga, right? In other words, bar Darga, sorry. But why does it bring it down? Because you see from here in this kind of case that people feel compelled to do things even if they're outside of the realm of halacha. That when it comes to redeeming someone who you love, I will say, who do I love? I love every Jew. When it comes to the possibility of bringing any Jew home, sometimes, again, I will say, sometimes it's not an intellectual decision, right? And it's not even necessarily a halachic. Everything needs to be a halachic decision. But sometimes, again, the emotionality of it is so profound that things are done. Maybe Levi bar Parga, keep saying that, maybe bar Darga, maybe he did ask a shayla, maybe he didn't ask a shayla, but Lamaise, he got it done. Incredible, I will say, incredible. There's a lot to say on this. I'll just point out, Tosas over here says an exception to this, Rabbi say, is one's wife, right? One is, right, right, good, right? Everyone's a big shot when they're not on camera, right? I'm going to turn the camera around. Everyone should see the facial expressions, right? So Tosas points out over here that when it comes to one's wife, one is permitted to spend any amount of money to redeem her. Why ishto kegufo? It's actually very interesting. So let's say I'm taken captive. I happen to be independently wealthy. There's no cap on the amount of money you could spend on yourself. Right? In other words, it's my money. I can spend on myself, whatever. So the same way that there's no cap on the amount of money that I could spend on my own redemption, there's also no cap on the amount of money that I could spend ultimately, again, on the redemption of one's spouse. Tosas also brings down Tamidi Chachamim, may be different. So there is the famous Maisa of the Maharam of Rotenberg, who was taken captive, ultimately again, and he was ready to be redeemed. The communities got together to redeem him. He forbade them from redeeming him, the Maharam, because he was afraid of incentivizing taking of captives, right? Kidnappings, incentivizing kidnappings. And in fact, again, his Talmud Darash narrowly escaped the kidnapping attempt. The Maharam ultimately died in captivity. Okay, but let's go weiter. A lot to say on this. Ein marvichin es hashvuyin. So we'll say furthermore, we don't help captives escape. So mipnei tikkun ha'olam, because of the benefit to society. So we'll say, my benayu, ika benayu deleka elachad. So we'll say, here's the concern. So now the Mishnah says, we do not help Jewish captives escape. Why not? What are we concerned about? So we'll say, so again, one says tikkun ha'olam, and one says tikkun ha'shvuyim. Now we'll say tikkun ha'olam could mean, ultimately, again, we're concerned that maybe we're going to take more captives. The other possibility says tikkun ha'shvuyim. Tikkun ha'shvuyim means we're afraid that if we help a Jewish captive escape, that what's going to happen? It's going to make things much worse for the remaining Jewish captives. What's the nafkamina? The nafkamina would be there's only one Jewish prisoner. There's only one. So if it's tikkun ha'olam, maybe it still applies. If it's takanas hashvuyim, there's no longer a shavoy. Good. So we'll say story. The daughters of Rav Nachman used to stir the pot with their hands, boiling pot with their hands. So we'll say Kashilei the Rav Elish. Rav Elish never understood how they were able to do it. Ksev Adam echad me'elaf matzasi v'isha b'chal eila la matzasi. Say kaban say Rav Nachman. So we'll say, so now what happened? So Rav Elish was always perplexed by this because we'll say he understood that their ability to go ahead and stir a pot, a boiling pot, with their hands must have indicated their piety. Like perfect piety, that they were just immune to everything. Yet the pasuk in Koheles says, you can't find a perfectly pious person. So he never understood how they were able to do this. So what happens? Gamrli Milse, something happened. Vishtabion Vishtabai, all of them were taken captive, right? So Rav Elish was taken captive. The daughters of Rav Nachman were taken captive. So we'll say, so what happens? So Vishtai Nami Ba'adayu Yom Achad Hav Yosef Gabeahu Gabra the Haviyada Belishna the Tzipuri Asa Orva The kakari lay. So we'll say what happened. One day, Rabbi Elish is sitting in captivity, and he's speaking with another guy, a cellmate, right? He's with another cellmate. And we'll say this cellmate had an interesting skill. He understood the language of the birds. So one day a raven comes by, and what happens? The raven starts calling out, Amrle, my kamar. So Rabbi Elish says to his cellmate, what is the raven saying? Amrle, Ilish brach, Ilish brach. Ilish, run away. Run away. Right? You can get out of here, run away. So Rabbi Elish said, Amar urva shikrahu, velo samichnale. Ultimately, ravens lie, and I'm not relying on the raven. Okay. Adahachi asa yona the kakari. So I say, meanwhile, what happened? A dove came. Amrle, my kamar. So I say the dove starts, what is the dove? Squawking? I don't know, whatever. Chirping, right? So Rabbi Elish says to his cellmate, what's going on over here? Amrle, Ilish brach. The dove is saying, Ilish, run away. Amrle Knesses Yisrael Kiyona Misla Shmamina Misrachesh Lenisa. Klal Yisrael is compared to a dove. It's compared to a dove. So the fact that the dove is telling me to run away, obviously I'm going to run away. Amrle Ezel Achse Banse Drav Nachman Ikamehemenu Sayu Ahadrinu. So we'll say, so what happens? So Village said, okay, but the daughters of Rav Nachman are also in captivity. If they have remained true to Yiddishkeit, then I will go ahead and redeem them as well. Right? I'll take them with me when I run away. So how's Rabbi Elish going to figure this out? Listen to this. Amar, Nashi komili di isle sidron la'adadi bebeis hakisei. So I'll say, so women, they talk about everything in the bathroom. Right? They talk about everything in the bathroom. So I'll go ahead, I'll see what's going on in the bathroom. I'll eavesdrop in the bathroom, and I'll hear what's going on over here. So the Gemara says, okay, Sham inhu dika amran. So he overhears them in the bathroom saying, so Adi govern v'nardoi govern. These men are captors, are our husbands, and our husbands from Nardo are our husbands. Let's tell our captor husbands to take us to a faraway place so that our Nardon husbands, our Jewish husbands, will no longer be able to find us. Rabbi says, so unfortunately, what had clearly occurred over here is that the daughters of Rav Nachman had become wives to their captors, and willingly had become wives to their captors to the point that they wanted nothing to do with their previous lives. So come Arak Asaiu, so Rav Elish ran away on his own. What happens? They will say, Vahu Gavra Lididei Israchesh Lenisa. So Gemara says, furthermore, I'm sorry. So come Arak Asaihu, Vahu Gavra. So we'll say, so what happens? Rav Elish ran away, and he told his cellmate, you know what? So he left behind the doors of Rav Nachman, right? He says to his cellmate, come with me. So Lididei Israchesh Lenisa Avar B'Mavra. So we'll say, so Rav Elish had a miracle. He was able to escape, cross the bridge. Vahu Gavra Ashkechua V'Katluha. His cellmate, unfortunately, again, did not make it to safety. Ultimately, again, did not make it to safety and was killed. Ultimately, so when Rav Elish came back, now he realized the ability of Rav Nachman's daughters, ultimately, again, to stir the pot was not because of any type of piety, but rather must have been because of some type of kishuf, some type of sorcery. Okay, so we'll say a very interesting story on a variety of different levels. We'll say what it also means is that sometimes when you see a perfect picture of piety, it's not a perfect picture of piety. We'll say there is no such thing as perfect piety in this world, and this is incredibly important to understand. The only perfection that resides in this world, or not fully resides, is Chakadosh Baruch Hu. Hatzur Tamim Pala, only Chakadosh Baruch Hu is perfect. There is no such thing as perfect piety in the realm of humanity, and this is incredibly important to understand. This is why we avoid deification even of the greatest of tzaddikim. No human being is perfect. And ultimately, again, the more we acknowledge that, the more we recognize that, first of all, then great people indeed become role models for us. And so we avoid the trap of ultimately putting certain people on pedestals when we really should not be doing so. There is no such thing as perfection in this world. Incredible. Says the Mishnah. I will say, there's so much to say in each of these stories, but this is one big daf. Okay, the Gemara's Mishnah says as follows. We'll say, ultimately, again, you cannot purchase Sifrei Torah, Sifrei Torah, tefillin, and mezuzos from Oved Kochavim more than their value. Then I will say, now why not? Amud Beis, Mipnei Tikkun, for the benefit of society. And I will say, now what's the Tikkun Olam over here? So I will say, B'Pashas, the Tikkun Olam is that we're afraid that once again you are going to create a market for stolen Judaica, right? If the Akum knows that I'm willing to pay any price to get back my Sifrei Torah, Tefillin, and mezuzahs from him, then unfortunately, again, it could go ahead and incentivize theft of Judaica. Amarle Rav Ada Bar Buja. Rashi says over here, top Rashi Memhem days, Mevnei Tikkun Olam, Imishum Duchka Ditzibura, Imishum Dolagarva V'lei Sutzvei. So it could be either because you're going to impoverish the community, or because you're going to incentivize theft of Judaica. Amarle Rav Buja Rav Ashi. Yes, you can't pay more than the value. But I will say for the actual value, you can go ahead and purchase it. I will say this is a very, very important distinction. The Mishnah is only saying you can't overpay for Judaica. But if, let's say, the Akum is selling it and he's selling it for the actual price, for the normal price, that you're allowed to purchase. Shmamina, what do you see from here? Sefer Torah Shlim Siviyat Ovei Kochavim Korenbo. Both say that if you find the Sefer Torah in the hands of an Ovei Kochavim, you could use it. You could use it. The Rasul will say the fact that the Gemara is saying that if they're charging normal prices, you can buy it back. Sounds like I could buy it back in what? Buy it back in what? And use it. Maybe not. Dilma lignos. Maybe means you could buy it back, but you still can't use it. And I will say, now why can't you use it? Why can't you use it? Remember, you don't know who wrote this, right? You don't know where it came from. So the Maisa, maybe it just means you're allowed to buy it back from the Akum, but you can't actually use it. Rather, you have to go ahead and bury it. We learned, Sefer Torah shekasuvu min yisaref. Well, Sefer Torah is written by a min. I will say, what's a min? Rashi says over here, min ha'aduk ba'avodos kocham kagon komer. So I will say, a min is someone who is very attached to his idolatry, like a priest. Like a priest. So as I was say, so a min is someone who, not just like episodically or recreationally worships Avodah Zarah, but like he's in, right? Fully embedded in his idolatrous practice. So if a Sefer Torah is written by a min, you burn it. If it's written by an akum, And I will say, what's an akum? So again, an akum is someone who worships idolatry, but is not as embedded in the idolatry. What do you do with that? Yiganes. Ultimately, you store it away, right? You bury it. Nimsa biyad min yiganes. So I'll say ultimately again, if it's, I will say, so remember, case number one where it was written by a min. If it's written by a min, you burn it. If it's written by an Oved Kochavim, you bury it. What if it's just found in the hands of a min? Or I don't know that the min wrote it or not. He just happens to be in possession of it. So nimsa biyad min yiganes. Then it's stored away. Nimsa biyad Oved Kochavim. If you find the Torah in the hands of an Oved Kochavim, amr la yiganes. Some say you have to bury it. Some say you can read it. Sefer Torah shekasa Oved Kochavim. If a Sefer Torah is written by an Oved Kochavim, tani chadi yisariv. One opinion says burn it. V'tanya idach yiganes. One opinion says bury it. V'tanya idach korenbo. Wow. Third opinion says you could use it. So we'll say this is the case we're focusing on over here. A Sefer Torah written by an akum. So three different opinions as to what you do with it. One opinion says burn it. One opinion says bury it. One opinion says you could use it. So lokashya hadisanya. So the opinion that says you have to burn it. Rabbi Eliezer, he the Amar stam machshavas Oved Kochavim la'avodos Kochavim. So we'll say Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that Allah Chalamaysa, when an Oved Kochavim does something, the assumption is that he is doing it for his idolatry, and therefore, when he wrote this Sefer Torah, who is he writing the Sefer Torah for? Not for the Ribbon Shalom, right? But for his idolatry. For his idolatry, but we learned. Another opinion says you store it away. So the Gemara says, "Hai tanu, the Tanu B'Hamnuna Derava mi Pashrunya Sefer Torah Tefillah Mezush Kasvan Min Umasra VaOmed Kochavim VeEved VeIsha VeKatan VeKusi VeIsram Mumar Psulin." There will say if you have a Sefer Torah or Tefillin or Mezuzah that are written by any of these individuals, a min, a masra, we'll say masra, someone who hands over Jews to the government, Ovid Kochavim, Eved, Isha, Katan, Kusi, Yisrael, Mumar, is pasal, Shneemar, Ukshartem, Uksaftem. So we'll say, because the pasuk juxtaposes the mitzvah of tefillin ultimately again to the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah. Kol sheyeshno b'kshira, yeshno b'ksiva. Whoever is obligated in the mitzvah of tefillin is obligated in the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah. V'chol she'eino b'kshira, whoever is not obligated in tefillin, eino b'ksiva, ultimately again is not included in the mitzvah of writing. So that's the opinion that says ultimately again you have to bury it. So we'll say it's the first opinion that says so remember Sefer Torah written by an akum. Opinion number 1, burn it. Opinion number 2, bury it. What about opinion number 3? What about the opinion that says you could use it? Very interesting. So hi Tana, this is the following of Tana. The Sanya. Incredible. They will say you can go ahead and purchase Svarim, Sifrei Torah, from an akum. Purchase Sifrei Torah from an akum. As long as what? As long as they're written appropriately. Wow. You could buy Sifrei Torah from an akum as long as they are written appropriately. There was a story in particular of Sidon, Shaya Kosev Svarim. He used to write Sifrei Torah. Rabbi Shmuel Silber allowed Jews to purchase from him. Incredible, I will say, absolutely incredible. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel Ibod Lishman by Ksilish Lo by. Rabbi Shmuel allowed that. Rabbi Shmuel even requires that the parchment be tanned for the Shema, for the sake of Sefer Torah. And Rabbi Shmuel holds that the parchment has to be tanned for the sake of Sefer Torah. Certainly the writing has to be done for the sake of Sefer Torah. This Sanya, Sipan Zahav, we'll say ultimately again, if you went ahead and you coated your tefillin in gold, or you covered it with the hide of a non-kosher animal, psulos, ultimately it's possible. Or behema tahoros ksheros. If you covered it with the hide of a kosher animal, it's kosher. V'afapi shelo ibdan lishman. Even though what Rabbi say, even though you did not tan the hide lishma. Rabbi Shmuel says, afilu ar behema tahoros psulos. Rabbi Shmuel says no. It will say even to use the hide of a kosher animal can only be done if it's tanned lishma. So I will say, if Rabbi Shmuel needs the tanning of the hide to be done lishma, he certainly needs what? The writing to be done lishma. If it needs the writing to be done lishma, how could he allow you to use a Sefer Torah written by an akum? Amar Rabbi Bar Shmuel, no, what's the case? Beger shechazar l'suro. We're talking about a ger. Ultimately, I will say who went ahead and went back to his idolatrous ways. Look at Rashi. Beger shechaz l'suro. Ra vahu ditsidon ger haya hava v'chaz l'suro v'yadua debari l'shman. So let's listen to this. So when do we allow a Sefer Torah written by an akum? I will say, what's the case of akum? The case is where you had a ger, person who converted, and then I will say, Rahman al-Islam, he went back to his original idolatrous ways. So I will say, so what's the chap with this guy? He knows what to do. And therefore we could trust him, interestingly enough, that when he writes a Sefer Torah, he's writing it lishma. Wow. So the Gemara says, Suro, Kol Shekin Dahavele Min. If he goes back, ultimately, again, I will say, to his original idolatrous ways, he's a min. And everyone agrees that a Sefer Torah written by a min has to be destroyed. Amar Rav Ashi, Shechaza l'Suro mishum yira. I will say, he went back, no, this is talking about a ger who went back to his original idolatry, I will say, not because of religious convictions, but why? Out of fear. So I will say, so this is pretty amazing. So according to Rabbi Shmuel Silber, I will say, so you can have a case of a Sefer Torah written by a ger. So I'll say, here's the case, right? Reuven converted, then went back to his idolatrous ways. Why did he back to his idolatrous ways? Out of fear. But right now, he is a full-fledged practicing idolater. He writes a Sefer Torah. Rabbi Shmuel says the Sefer Torah is kosher and can be used. Why? Because this guy knows what to do. He knows that when he writes the Sefer, if it needs to be kosher, what does he have to do? He has to write it l'shma. We are confident that he's writing it l'shma in the right way. And we'll say, what's incredible about this? We'll say, but he's an idolater. And we'll say, we are so confident in the Jew that even the Jew who turns idolater could find the ability to do the right thing just for a given amount of time. I would say that is the power of the Jew, that even the Jew turned idolater. He knows that if this Sefer Torah needs to be kosher, he needs to write it Lishma for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are confident in his ability to do so. But he's an idolater. I will say, even idolaters could have moments of spiritual clarity. Even idolaters, ultimately, again, could have moments of spiritual transcendence. And I will say, listen to this. If an idolater, if a Jew turned idolater could have moments of spiritual transcendence and spiritual clarity, then I will say, imagine what we have the ability to do. Sometimes we think that we're so ruined. We think we're so broken. We think that we're so messed up because of bad decisions that we made. I will say, if the ger shechazer l'suro could write a kosher Sefer Torah that could be used by the Kehillah every Monday, Thursday, Shabbos, to be Yosei their halachas, then I will say, imagine what we could do. Imagine how we could transcend our mistakes as well. Imagine how we could lift ourselves up and rehabilitate ourselves spiritually as well. Incredible. I will say, let's just finish the Mishnah. Hayitayasa. So Gemara says, we'll say quickly. Tana Rabbanan, Malam b'Domein ad Kedei Trapik. We'll say you are allowed to pay a little bit over market value. Right, just the tropic, a little bit over value. My tropic, I'm Rav Sheshes, Istira, a little bit more. Hitayasa, there was a particular Arab woman, the Aisi Chaisi de Tefillah Kamei de Abaye. She brought a bag of tefillin to Abaye. She wanted to sell to Abaye. Amarle said to her, Yahavasli Reish Tarmi. I'll give you a couple of dates for it. So Imla Zihira, she got so angry. Shakla Shadesinu Benar. She took the bag of tefillin and what? She threw it into the river. Amar Abaye said, I made a mistake. I should not have demeaned the value of the tefillin so much in her presence. So Abaye said, because I demeaned it, I only offered her a couple of dates. Ultimately, again, she got angry. The Rabbi was saying, the power of mitzvah. So much to say about this, but we are out of time. I will say, wow, what a daf. Okay, Baruch Hashem, Shkach, I will say, another incredible week of learning. A good Erev Shabbos. Good Shabbos, thank you.